Our guest today is Vahan Zanoyan, former top energy consultant turned philanthropist. During his 35-year professional experience analyzing the energy market, he was frequently quoted in top publications such as the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Zanoyan's latest novel, The Sacred Sands, provides an insider's view on foreign policy and the geopolitically charged oil industry. Visit his website today at zanoyanvahan.com. Vahan, welcome to Savvy Business Radio for our Heartbeat of the World video series. How are you?
Great. It's a pleasure to meet you.
It's a pleasure to meet you too. Antonia, our wonderful friend, connected us, and you've been an energy expert for many years, helping and serving businesses. And we're hoping that you could talk to us a little bit about that. That is one thing that is your expertise, and as well, you've written a wonderful book that's a fiction book based on reality, and it's about human trafficking. And that one's called, I just had it here, A Place Far Away, and your newest book, The Sacred Sands, talking about oil companies. So you've written on some extraordinary work. You're also a philanthropist. Before we go to all of that, share a little bit about your background. What brought you to working in energy and then working as being a philanthropist?
Well, I was an economist, and we used to build econometric models of oil-producing countries. Mm-hmm. And I got into the energy through the back door in a way, because we were trying to understand the economies of the oil-producing countries in the Middle East, in Europe, in Asia. And very soon we realized that without understanding the oil market, it was very difficult to say anything meaningful about these economies, because they depended largely on their exports of oil. Mm-hmm. So before I knew it, I was getting engrossed in the energy business kind of market rather than just the economics of oil producing countries. And then, long story, I spent about 35 years advising oil producing governments and oil and gas producing and trading companies, big corporations and trading firms and banks and so on. Now, it was through that experience, actually, that especially back in the mid to late 80s, which were extremely turbulent times in the oil business. That's when, I don't know, some of your listeners may be old enough to remember, there was the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, there was Desert Storm, we went to war, we pushed the Iraqi invasion back, and then there was, in 2001, there was September 11, and then 2003, we had the second Gulf War. This novel, The Sacred Sands, which you mentioned, is set in that period. And it's kind of largely based on my experiences at the time, because at the time, as an advisor to many of these governments, I was really in the middle of it all. So, including, by the way, the U.S. government, U.S. Department of Energy, Department of State and Defense, and we used to have meetings about the Middle East. So it was a truly fascinating period, both for the global energy markets, but also for U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and in the region. And what I find fascinating is that many of the more recent developments, the last few years in the Middle East, as well as in energy markets, are a direct consequence of the events of the 80s, of those wars. You know, the birth of ISIS, the terrorism, the rise of Islamic fundamentalism, the roots of all these were already in those events that happened back then. And I throw that parallel in The Sacred Sands. There is an epilogue which goes back, which comes back. Sorry, it kind of, the epilogue takes place in 2016, and it throws a look back at those events of the 80s and draws a parallel between those two.
This is fascinating to me, Vahan, because I remember way back when in 2011, I was talking to an ex-boss of mine at Associated Press, and he said to me, now he is not in media at all, he was in the finance side, we both were, and he said to me, I'm really seeing that the Middle East is a religious war, and I said I saw it as a profit resource war. And from your perspective, would it be that both sides had different things? Like, would it be that the Middle East is more focused on maybe a religious aspect and more us maybe focused on getting more resources, aka oil, and taking that? What is your perspective on both how the Middle East sees it and how the U.S. sees it?
Well, we have we have some conflicts, internal conflicts, okay, when we look at them. On the one hand, we definitely are after resources. There's no question about this. I mean, only the most naive will think we don't. But at the same time, we have tried to uphold certain values as we approach those regions. But we have not always succeeded, because sometimes the values we uphold go directly in contradiction to the material interests and to the geopolitical interests that we have there. Our interests there are realpolitik. They're not idealistic. I mean, you hear a lot of idealism sometimes in various speeches, in political speeches, in stated objectives, but I have a whole chapter in the Sacred Sands called Undeclared Objectives. And it is those undeclared objectives that really drive policy, and there is very little idealism in there. Now, it just so happens that a lot of our allies on whom we rely for our energy source do not share our values, and we turn a blind eye. And the reason we turn a blind eye, because at that point we prioritize what's more important for us at this moment in time, and the interests happen to be. By the way, it's the same everywhere. It's the same with our European allies. It's exactly what the British has done throughout their history. They have pursued interests, not ideologies. So there is that conflict. And what happens is a lot of times that almost double standard between the values that we try to uphold domestically and the ones that we tend to discard internationally, that conflict has created very anti-American sentiments around the world. And then we wonder what happened. Why do they hate us? Okay. So it hasn't been an easy thing. And in general, there's another section in the book where I discuss how we have generally favored unpopular leaders. We don't like, by we, I mean the United States, obviously, but also a lot of our European allies are the same way. We don't like popular, democratically elected leaders because those do not depend on us for their survival. We like corrupt leaders because in order to keep their seats, those corrupt leaders often need US support, British support, French support, sometimes Russian support. And we don't like independent leaders. So there's another conflict there.
Yeah, there's definitely a double standard. And when I think it was the late 90s into 2000, especially when we hit 9/11, that I really started pushing for people to become educated and realize the way we were acting abroad, that this was going to haunt us for generations and generations to come. That, oh yes, okay, 9/11 happened, we have to go kick some butt, which is generally a big portion of people that I met around here in New York. They're just like, we need to go there and kick butt. I'm like, yes, but let's look at this realistically. Why do we really want to go there? What's really going on here? And let's just not go ape wild and just start shooting people and going to war for 12 years now. And what is that solving? It's really, it's obscene. So for me, what would you see as a solution for people beginning to have the core values they think they have? Because if most people were to see what we've done in the Middle East and really have a real front row seat to what's been happening the past 12 years, I don't think most people would be okay with it. But what would be the solution for people to become aware of this?
See, the problem is it's very difficult to retract. Now, there's a whole reality on the ground that's been created by past mistakes and sometimes past positive actions. Every new administration that comes has to react to that. They cannot just start and say, okay, let's take a clean slate and start from that. By the way, I'm not even opposed to kicking butt. The problem with our second Gulf War, 2003 Gulf War, was we were kicking the wrong butt. I mean, it makes no sense to go all up in arms and kick the wrong butt.
Yeah.
The butts that we kicked in the second Gulf War had nothing to do with September 11. Nothing. Now, I mean, some of those mistakes, I see them repeated today. This list of banned countries have nothing to do with terrorism in the United States. Whereas there are other countries whose citizens have been involved in terrorism in the United States, they're not on that list. For example,
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia, UAE. I mean, but no, those are our allies. We don't touch them, even though most of the citizens of September 11 were from those countries. Now, so this urge to go and kick butt is a maybe natural thing, all we needed to do is identify the right target.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we had stuck to that, and in several cases, if we had not turned our backs on popular governments, and this has been going on forever, by the way, back in the 40s, 50s in Syria, in Iran, before the collapse of the Shah, way back. And that's how we've created enemies, by turning our backs on popular governments and installing unpopular government. If we had avoided this, today, the United States would be in a much better position, not just in the Middle East, globally, I think. We would have far more credibility than we have now. The problem, coming to your question, what can we do now, is so difficult, because already the stage is set now. I think each consecutive US president finds it more and more difficult, even when they see this problem, to get right on that track, because they're dealing with those days' realities on the ground. Now, when Obama came, he had inherited the second Gulf War legacy. When Bush came, he had inherited September 11, and before that, the first Gulf War, which he's... By the way, I was very much supportive of the first Gulf War, of Desert Storm, where we reversed the invasion of Kuwait. We couldn't have allowed, as a major power in the world, there was no way we could have allowed that to prevail. This is under Bush 1.
Yes.
But everything, all the adventurism that happened after September 11 has backfired on us. And it's, partly because, in my humble opinion, the entire September 11 tragedy, which was an enormous tragedy, was abused and used for all kinds of other purposes. For this emerging militancy in the United States that happened as a consequence, all kinds of other agendas were hung on it, on the same issue, and then it helped justify all types of agendas which had nothing to do with September 11.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was the problem.
Yeah, I mean, even within a month of 9/11, we had the Patriot Act, which was, the idea was, okay, we'd strip away your rights if we think you're a terrorist, but who to decide who's a terrorist and who's not? I mean, they could pretty much deem anyone a terrorist. So, I mean, those are dangerous grounds. And then as far as Saudi Arabia, people were saying to me, well, why didn't Trump really just ban that country? And you're like, well, we depend on oil. They're our number one oil distributors. What do we do? We'd have to get oil somewhere else. And do you see a solution for us maybe finding our oil here? Because we do have parts of the U.S. that we haven't explored.
Actually, the United States has become far less dependent on foreign oil since those days than in the last 20, 30 years. More recently, through the shale oil, it's become even less dependent. Today, the United States actually exports oil, which was banned back right after the Arab oil embargo in the 73. I don't know if you remember.
Yes.
Exporting oil was banned. Now, a lot has happened. And aside from the changes in the oil side in the United States, let's not forget the technology in the cleaner energies. Solar and electric cars are becoming now here in California. Everywhere I drive, I see Teslas all over the place. I mean, it's taking on. Solar power is taking on. The technology is becoming cheaper. Like one famous oil minister once said, we will not stop using oil when we run out of it, just like the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, right? So it's technology that ends an era and brings the next one. So it's an interesting kind of period in the world, because we're in the middle of a transition, in my opinion. On the one hand, we're discovering and producing more oil in the United States. On the other hand, we're also becoming less dependent on oil itself because of these alternative energy sources. So that gives a double kind of whammy to our dependence on foreign. All this is already taking place. It's not going to take place because of policy. It's taking place because of technology. Shale oil is technology. Alternative is technology. It has nothing to do with what any president says or does. It's economics that drives it. It's markets that drive it.
Got it.
Yeah.
So tell me, what is our, why have we not been more tough on like Saudi Arabia? Is there another reason that we kind of tie ourselves to them and not put a hold on them per se? What would be your perspective on that?
a lot of it is legacy from the old days during the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
We were always partial to countries which we suspected could be susceptible to move into Russian influence or Soviet influence.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we stuck with Egypt through thin and thick, even during corrupt governments, because we didn't want them to shift from American side to the Soviet side. There was a little bit of this, but largely Saudi Arabia has the largest oil reserves.
Mm-hmm.
We share very little values with Saudi Arabia. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, today, if you look at the internal conditions in Saudi Arabia, the rules that govern women's behavior and so on, we have absolutely nothing in common.
Mm-hmm.
But we have commercial interests. Mm-hmm. A lot of, not just oil, but also other commercial. The oil is probably the largest commercial interest. But we sell them a lot of arms, billions, trillions maybe over the years. And it's kind of in the region, it's probably the most important pro-American, or it's not even as pro-American as it used to be, by the way. It used to be much more. Things started changing with the decline of American credibility after the Second Gulf War. Mm-hmm. But still, it's our most important ally to some extent in the region. It has had no direct confrontation with Israel, for example, unlike Syria, unlike Egypt, unlike Iran, where at least there is rhetoric, not confrontation, but a lot of anti-Israeli rhetoric. Mm-hmm. Unlike Iraq also had a lot of anti-Israeli rhetoric. Mm-hmm. Saudi Arabia has kind of stayed out of that. And so we tolerate. Mm-hmm. And we put the value system way on the furthest back burner, and we look at the current interests that we pursue there. So,
wow. Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, let's go into a little bit of your book here and talk about human trafficking. How did you get to even writing a fiction book based on true reality? How did that come about for you?
By pure chance. I ran into... First, let me back up. About 6 years ago, I made a very important executive decision that I'm retiring from my energy consulting business. Mm-hmm. And my passion from childhood, since I was a teenager, actually, not child, has been to writing. So I retired. I devoted myself to literature. I published 2 volumes of poetry. And then, by pure chance, I ran into a very young 16-year-old girl in Dubai. And I could tell something is off. Okay, she was sitting with an elderly woman and something was off. Anyway, it's a long story. It took me over 6 months to find out that she was conned into with all kinds of false promises. She was taken from her small village in Armenia, raped, beaten, and thrown into this forced prostitution business. And she was forced to accept 20, 25 clients a day. Imagine this innocent, totally innocent young girl. And beautiful, literally. It became an obsession. I just couldn't drop it. I went back and forth. I stopped everything else and I pursued this till finally I got her confidence. She started telling me her story. And look, it's one thing to read and hear about this on the news. You say how sad, you feel bad. It's an entirely different thing to face someone who's been a victim of it, who's still suffering as a victim of it, and to hear her story directly from her mouth. And I just couldn't put it down. Anyway, and I thought at the time, first, maybe I should write an article, I should expose this through an op-ed piece and so on. And then I thought, what would be the medium where I can make much more noise, okay, where I can reach much more people. And that's when I decided to write the first novel. And I interviewed about 12 of these girls. Once I got her trust, she brought me some of her friends who were also forced into it. And I fictionalized it a little bit, but not much. I fictionalized it in the sense that, for example, I combined the stories of 4 different girls into my main character. So every component of that story has happened to someone at some point, but it hasn't happened to the same girl as I tell the story. So in that sense, I call it fiction, but actually everything has actually happened there. And I wrote a story of how they were fooled, captured, raped, beaten, and taken to Moscow, then to Dubai, and under what conditions they were living there, and so on and so forth. And then the fiction part is, of course, I gave it a happy ending by having her escape at the end, which rarely happens. It never happens. Unfortunately, the only real fiction part is the happy part in the story. There's no happy part in real life in this story.
Wow.
But that's how it started. I mean, if I hadn't ran into her, I wouldn't even be aware. Maybe I'd be aware, but I wouldn't be so engrossed in this phenomenon called sex trafficking. It's gruesome.
Well, it really, really is. And it's so great that we're touching on it. I've recently listened to a broadcaster in Texas named Doc Green, and he's meeting once a week, having a series of a detective coming on who's dealing with children who've gone missing. And a lot of them, she's found, have been sold into sex trafficking. And they're young kids from 13 or even younger, all the way up to 17, 18, who've been sold into sex trafficking. And even when they get them back and they are sent home, they are destroyed. Even if they are able to get them back, they are not the same people. They have to deal with all this inner turmoil and darkness and evil. And how do you even begin to recuperate from that, if you can even get back out of that life? What are some of your solutions, say, here in the United States, to kind of protect our kids against that?
Actually, a lot has happened in the past couple of years, because it was this, I think a year or two ago, it was Sex Trafficking Awareness Year. The United Nations got into it. In many cities and towns now, there are hotlines which didn't exist before. And I think because of all the noise that was made, the police and the responsible government agencies are much more diligent about following this through, because unless you create a lot of public noise, it's usually not a priority for government. And until recently, I remember back when I was doing the research, maybe by recently, I mean until 5-6 years ago, there still was a lot of confusion between the victim and the criminal. I mean, people tended to say they're all prostitutes. I mean, they didn't differentiate between a victim of sex trafficking and prostitution. To me, they're entirely different things, entirely. I mean, if a mature woman, for whatever reasons of her own, decides to do this prostitution as a career, if you can call it that, it's not my business. You know, it's not. I don't have to like it or not like it or pass judgment. That's one thing. Taking a 15, 16-year-old innocent girl, beating it, fooling her, raping her, and then throwing her in this against her will, this is beyond criminal. This is not any longer a matter of prostitution. But I'm telling you, 5-6 years ago, people didn't differentiate between those two.
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of awareness. There's much more diligence. By the way, one of the most interesting things and pleasant things that happened to me in this otherwise very unpleasant experience was when I got a call from Homeland Security Asylum Division. They have an asylum division, and they were training 70 of their officers, and they had somehow read the book, A Place Far Away. Awesome. And they called me and they said, look, this seems to be a very well-researched book. Would you like to come and talk to our officers? I was delighted. I hopped on a plane, I gave them about 2-hour talk because they were curious, how did I get this close to the victim? Okay, while still she was in captivity. Mm-hmm. So it was very helpful to them to explain what it took to gain her confidence, because these victims are so scared, are beaten, are threatened. They don't talk about their story. They're not supposed to talk their story. Mm-hmm. The criminals, they do something really incredible. They stage themselves fake rescue attempts to the girls. And any girl that actually cooperates is beaten so far, and then their families are threatened, and they're scared to such an extent that they are totally scared to talk about their experience to anybody. So that's why it took me 6 months of continuous attempts till I finally got her confidence. This is something that the Homeland Security officers were very interested in. So it comes a point where you don't know what to do. You're helpless as an individual. Entire governments are trying to fight this phenomenon, and they cannot because it's a huge multi-billion-dollar business. My only recourse at that time was to make noise, to make it public, and I had this conviction at the time that if you have seen this and stay quiet, you're part of the problem. If you've seen this and don't say anything, don't scream from the rooftops, you're part of the crime, because this is what the criminals want. What the criminals want is for all of us to be quiet, scared, or a lot of communities, by the way, are too ashamed to talk about this. It's not only fear, it's fear, but also shame. So we're all ashamed, we're all afraid, we don't talk, and in this overall public silence, this ideal environment for them to carry on.
Yeah.
And my thing was, we're not going to give them that. And the little that I can do actually, the second novel, The Doves of Vahan, is a sequel of this, A Place Far Away. And I was on every talk show, every TV show, every newspapers, interviews, on. The more the noise we make, the better. Yes. Because that's exactly what the criminals do not want. So,
absolutely.
It's the only, as an individual, it's all I could do. I couldn't get up and start a mission. I mean,
yeah, you can't go out there and start buck wild and shooting them all.
Yeah,
it's not going to work. Yeah, but it's true. I think the way we can all really take part in this and see it go away is if we call attention. You know how it's always been said, if you turn on the light, darkness doesn't exist, right? We shine the light about what's going on, all the darkness, not just sex trafficking, but whether it be what's going on in the Middle East or any of the issues going on in the world, shining light on it and being educated about it, I think it's the first step for us changing that.
So that's when, by the way, I decided to donate all the proceeds from these books, all other books, even the books that have nothing to do with sex trafficking, to various organizations that either fight sex trafficking or protect the victims, survivors. And then I realized books don't sell very much, unfortunately. I mean, they do, but it's not like a huge amount. So then I decided, okay, I'm going to match every dollar of book sales and then give double the amount to this organization. Because when you confront a phenomenon like this, you cannot not do anything, okay? You write the books, but you cannot leave it there. I mean, you have, and I've gotten, in the course of doing the research, as well as afterwards, I've gotten to know many, many organizations that are truly devoted to this issue. These are NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And it's worth supporting them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let everyone know where they can get your book, find out more about you.
Yeah. In fact, if every time someone buys one of my books, they're helping this cause, because all the proceeds after being matched are being donated. So,
yeah. And they can get it on Amazon. Is there a website they can go to?
Every book is available on Amazon. The Sacred Sands, The Place Far Away. I have my own personal website. You can go there too, but Amazon is the simplest thing, probably.
Yeah. Fabulous. Do you have any books on the horizon?
Yes, I'm working on my fourth novel now, which is about wine, one of my other passions. I love wine.
Wow. Well, we have to have you back for that one. Well, I want to thank you again, Vahan. This has been truly fascinating, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today on Savvy Business Radio.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
After 5 years of creating exciting business content with amazing businesses from around the world, Savvy is now creating a new video series entitled Heartbeat of the World. This series will feature experts from around the globe. We will highlight and discuss some of the greatest challenges facing the U.S. and the world. Co-create with us and find out more at bit.ly/SavvyPatron.
Savvy Business Radio, and runs in syndication on 8 AM/FM stations nationwide, including iHeartRadio and 6 podcasting platforms. To find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or to become a guest and find out how we can help you get your message out in a bigger way, call 732-474-7375 or email Christina at savvybusinessradio.com.